You are 41 years of age, and it is a Saturday evening, and you are reclining in bed, gazing at the rafters. Your smartphone just flashed with a new alert from your banking software. One of those useful small prompts that your checking account balance has fallen under $1,000 once more. And as you rest there, you are performing that action we all do occasionally. That silent internal arithmetic where you calculate your auto loan, your home loan, and your children's hobbies, and realize that for some reason, despite earning more income than you ever have in your existence, you feel more financially trapped than ever. Here is what nobody mentions to you about your 40s. This decade does not dictate how wealthy you will become. It identifies how peaceful your future remains. And those are two entirely distinct concepts. My name is James, and I have utilized a lot of time pondering about wealth, not just the mechanics of it, but the psychology of it and the way fiscal choices mold our lives in manners we do not perceive until decades later. What I have uncovered is that your 40s represent a type of split in the path that most individuals stroll right past without observing. The route you select quietly dictates whether the upcoming 20 years of your existence feel regulated or reactive, whether you stir at 60 with alternatives or with burdens. If you find yourself agreeing with any of this, do me a kindness and tap that subscribe icon. This platform is about assisting people like you to view wealth differently. And if this footage helps alter your outlook even a tiny bit, that like icon informs me I should continue producing material like this. Now, let me explain why your 40s are so distinct from every other decade. Most individuals assume that constructing wealth is about generating more income. And look, salary matters. I am not going to claim it does not. But here's what the statistics actually demonstrate. According to current Federal Reserve reports, about half of citizens perceive themselves as living paycheck to paycheck. And here's the astonishing portion. It is not just lower income households. Bank of America analysis indicates that lifestyle inflation is often the primary cause of fiscal tension. You purchased a residence and you bought a couple of vehicles. And before you realize it, all your cash is exiting for invoices. This is the contradiction of the 40s. You are likely generating more than you ever have, but you are also spending more than you ever have. And the space between those two figures, that is what actually dictates your future. Let me illustrate two scenarios for you. Path appears prosperous on paper. High salary and a lovely house in a fine school zone. Two newer vehicles in the driveway, perhaps a country club pass, or some deluxe memberships you rarely utilize. But beneath that exterior, every cent is spoken for. Your static costs consume 70 or 80% of what you bring home when something unforeseen occurs, and something always occurs. You either place it on a credit card or you reach into whatever tiny savings buffer you have managed to create. You are not penniless, but you are not liberated either. You are financially trapped in what behavioral experts call a lack mindset, constantly balancing upcoming costs, always conscious of the next invoice, the next installment, and the next financial burden. Path B appears less grand from the exterior. Perhaps you operate a car that is a few years older, perhaps your residence is a bit smaller than what you could technically permit. But here is what is distinct. You have a margin, 20 or 30% of your salary is not already pledged to static costs. When possibilities emerge, whether that is an asset, a professional transition, or just the opportunity to take unpaid leave for something vital, you can actually say, yes, you are not constantly functioning in endurance mode. You are constructing. And here is what most individuals overlook. The gap between these two routes is not usually salary. It is choices, specifically the choices you make in your 40s about your static costs. Let me be precise about why this decade is so distinct. When you are in your 20s or 30s, you have time on your side. You can commit financial errors and mend them. Save nothing until you are 32. You still have 30 plus years of compounding ahead of you. Take a professional gamble that does not succeed. You have decades to adjust your course. But in your 40s, the arithmetic begins to shift. Not because it is too late. It is definitely not. But because every choice compounds forward in a more intense way. You still have time, but you do not have endless restarts anymore. Consider this the historical median yearly return of the S&P 500 over the previous several decades has been roughly 10%, including dividends. But that expansion does not assist you if you are not engaging in it. And here is the uncomfortable reality. According to Vanguard's analysis on retirement funds, the median 401k total for citizens in their 40s is somewhere near $150,000. Now, some individuals have much more and some have much less. That is just the average. But what stands out when you examine this data is how far below what most savers assume they will require it actually is. Northwestern Mutual analysis shows people believe they require about $1.26 million to retire comfortably. There is a giant gap between where most individuals are and where they desire to be. The inquiry is what bridges that gap. It is not a trending stock suggestion. It is not digital currency or property gambling. What bridges that gap is something much more tedious and much more potent. It is the choices you make about your monthly overhead. Let me provide some figures that might amaze you. The median new vehicle installment in America currently is about $750 per month, according to Experian statistics. If you are financing a pre-owned car, you are looking at around $530. That is for one car, and most homes have two. So let us say you are paying $1,400 a month between two car installments over a typical 6-year credit period. That is over $100,000 just in car payments. Now imagine if instead of the new SUV and the sedan, you purchased dependable used vehicles with cash, something 5 or 6 years old that you could possess completely. That $700 gap per month, allocated in a basic index fund, averaging even a modest 7% real return after inflation, would expand to over $100,000 in 10 years. That is one choice. Cars, just cars. Now let us discuss residence. According to the Census Bureau and current Federal Reserve data, homeowners with a mortgage are spending a median of about 21% of their salary on housing costs. Families are spending 30, 40, even 50% of their salary just on housing. The Department of Housing and Urban Development classifies anyone spending more than 30% of their income on housing as cost-burdened, and current data shows that over 50% of tenant households and nearly a quarter of homeowners with mortgages fall into that group, and here's what this implies in practical terms. If you committed yourself to a house at the peak of what you could afford at age 38, you might be trapped paying for that choice until you are 68 or further. Every month that inflated mortgage payment takes dollars that could be compounding and delivers them to the bank instead. Now I want to be transparent about something. I am not suggesting you should never purchase a fine car or reside in a nice house. What I am saying is that the 40s are when these choices begin to have lasting effects. The fiscal selections you make now do not just impact next month's bank total, they ripple forward into your 50s and 60s and dictate whether you enter those decades with alternatives or with burdens. Let us discuss what is actually occurring in your brain. When you are under fiscal tension, this is where it becomes truly fascinating. Scholars in behavioral economics, including some significant work by Senthil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, have recorded something they label the scarcity mindset. When people feel like they do not possess enough, whether it is time, money, or any other asset, their brains begin to function differently. They develop what scholars call tunneling. This extreme focus on immediate issues that makes it tougher to ponder long-term effects. Think about it this way. When your car fails and you do not have a backup fund, your brain enters firefighting mode. All your mental vigor is concentrated on, how do I pay for this fix right now? You are not thinking about your pension savings. You are not thinking about professional opportunities. You are just attempting to endure until next Friday. But here's what is intriguing. This effect is not just about being objectively impoverished. It is about the sensation of scarcity, the internal perception that your assets are not sufficient for your requirements, which means that someone earning $150,000 a year but spending $145,000 can endure the same cognitive narrowing as someone earning far less. The scarcity mindset does not just make you feel poorly, it actually damages decision-making. Evidence suggests that fiscal stress drains mental bandwidth, leaving fewer cognitive assets for thinking about other hurdles and possibilities. People in this condition tend to make more short-term focused choices, sometimes over-borrowing or postponing vital financial steps, because they cannot think past the immediate emergency. And this leads me to one of the most vital points about your 40s. The target is not just to have more wealth. The target is to have enough margin that your brain can shift out of survival mode and into expansion mode. When you have 3 to 6 months of costs stored in a backup fund, something remarkable occurs. You stop trembling every time your smartphone chirps. You stop resting awake, doing internal arithmetic about whether you can afford to mend the heater. That cognitive burden and that constant low-level stress, it evaporates, and suddenly you have mental room for other things, for thinking tactically about your profession, for spotting opportunities you would have been too anxious to see, for being present with your household, instead of constantly fretting about cash. According to the Federal Reserve's latest report on household economic health, only about 55% of Americans have set aside enough to cover 3 months of costs in a backup fund. That means nearly half of American adults are one poor month away from disaster. And here is what makes this so miserable. Constructing an emergency fund is one of the highest return assets you can create, not in terms of interest gained, but in terms of tension lowered and opportunity seized. The psychological return on having 6 months of costs sitting in a dull savings account is massive. and it alters how you move through the world. Let me talk about what happens when you do construct that buffer. When you create some margin in your existence, suddenly you have what I call walk-away money. Not enough to retire, but enough that you do not have to accept the first bid that arrives. Enough that you can bargain from power instead of desperation. Think about how this functions in your career. Let's say your supervisor asks you to do something that breaks your ethics, or your firm starts heading in a path you do not trust in, or you get a job bid that requires moving, but offers real expansion potential. If you are living paycheck to paycheck with no wealth, you have no influence, and you have to say yes to things you do not desire, and no to possibilities you do want, simply because you cannot afford the fiscal disruption. But if you have 6 months of costs stored, if your month that you could endure a gap in work, everything shifts, and you can resist that unfair demand. You can take the calculated gamble on the new possibility. You can invest in yourself, perhaps pay for a credential, or attend a seminar on your own budget, because you are playing attack instead of defense. This creates a helpful feedback loop. Better fiscal status leads to more assurance, which leads to better professional choices, which leads to better fiscal status. The people who feel trapped in their professions are often the same people who feel trapped in their finances. And it is not a coincidence. The one fuels the other now. Let us talk about the errors. The pitfalls that people stumble into that silently ruin years of advancement. Trap number 1, lifestyle inflation. You get a salary increase and within 6 months, your costs have climbed to match. Your lifestyle expands to devour whatever salary you have. Research from various financial agencies consistently shows that higher income homes often have the same fiscal tension as middle income homes because their spending increases alongside their profit. The cure for lifestyle inflation is what I call the 50% rule. Whenever you get an increase, automatically shift at least half of it to savings or assets before you adjust your lifestyle. Let your lifestyle improve, certainly, but let your savings improve quicker. Trap number 2, using savings goals as spending prizes. You reach $50,000 in your pension account and you honor it by purchasing a boat. You construct your emergency fund and then you use it for a trip. I grasp the urge, I truly do. You labored hard for that cash. But the point of constructing savings is not to have money to spend. It is to have money laboring for you. Every time you treat your retirement fund as a piggy bank, you reset the timer on compounding. Trap number 3, residence upgrades. This is the major one, as you have some value in your current residence. Rates were low for a period, so perhaps you refinanced or improved. Now you are sitting in a residence that is valued more. Sure, but you are also paying a larger mortgage installment every month for the next 30 years. According to current studies, the typical household would need to spend 38% of their salary to cover mortgage installments on a median-priced new residence. That is assuming they can even qualify. For many citizens, especially in high-cost cities, housing costs have become the single largest obstacle to constructing wealth. Trap number 4. Vehicle choices. I already noted the average car installment of $750 for new cars. But let me put this in harsher terms. Nearly 20% of new car buyers are now pledging to monthly installments of $1,000, or more than 22% are taking out 84-month credits. That is 7 years just to make the... By the time you finish a 7-year vehicle loan, you often have little to no value in the car, and you are likely ready for a different one. It becomes a cycle that never concludes. Here is what I want you to grasp. These are not ethical failures, taking on a large car installment or buying more house than you require. These are ordinary things that ordinary people do. Our entire economy is crafted to encourage them, but ordinary is not the same as ideal. And in your 40s, when your choices have massive results for the next 2 decades of your existence, it is worth questioning whether you want to do what is ordinary or what actually benefits your future self. So what should you do instead? Let me give you some concepts. Not orders, because your situation is distinct. And I am not a financial consultant. I am just someone who has pondered a lot about this. First, identify your figure, not your salary, but your savings rate. What percentage of your net pay are you actually retaining? Wealth experts often suggest saving 15% of your income, for retirement specifically. But most Americans are saving less than 5% of their salary currently. The gap between those figures is where tension originates. You do not have to reach 15% by tomorrow, but you should know where you are and have a strategy to move forward. Second, focus on lowering static costs over boosting salary. But here is the thing. $1 saved from your static monthly overhead is worth more than $1 earned because it is after tax and it is permanent. If you can lower your monthly burden by $500, that is the same as earning $6,000 or $7,000 more per year, every year forever. And unlike a raise, which you might exhaust, a lowered cost actually remains in your wallet. Third, automate everything. The studies on willpower are evident. It is a restricted asset. If you depend on inspiration to save money every month, you will fail. But if you arrange automatic transfers to your savings and on payday before you ever see the cash, it happens without needing any willpower at all. This is not about being more controlled. It is about building structures that do not require control. Fourth, think in alternative costs. Every major purchase has a hidden cost. The substitute use of that wealth. When you purchase a $45,000 car, you are not just spending $45,000. You are abandoning what that money could have turned into over 20 years. At 7% real returns, that is over $170,000. I am not saying never purchase a nice car. I am saying know what it actually costs. Fifth, guard your margin fiercely. Once you construct some buffer between your income and your costs, most precious financial asset you can possess in your 40s, more precious than any asset or any salary level. Margin is what provides you alternatives. Margin is what lets you sleep at night. Every fiscal choice you make should be assessed through the perspective of whether it protects or ruins your margin. Here's what it boils down to. Your 40s are a pivot point, but they are not a finish line. You still have time to make significant alterations. You still have decades of potential compounding ahead of you, but the window for simple repairs is shutting. The choices you make in this decade will resonate forward into your retirement in ways that the choices you made in your 20s simply did not. Stress is not triggered by not enough. It is triggered by exposure and by having too little buffer between you and the next fiscal disturbance. Minimize that exposure and the future becomes quieter. Build some margin between your income and your costs, and you will be startled at how differently you experience your existence. I know this footage covered a lot of territory, and I know that shifting fiscal direction in your 40s can feel intimidating when you have kids and mortgages and professions and all the entanglement of middle adult life. But here is what I want you to remember. Small alterations compound as well. You do not have to transform your financial life overnight. You just have to begin making choices that benefit your 60-year-old self instead of just your present self. So let me ask you this, and I truly want to hear from you in the remarks. What is one financial choice you made in your past that you would do differently if you could go back? What would you tell your younger self about wealth? Post that in the remarks below. I read every single one, and I think we can discover a lot from each other's journeys. If this footage gave you something to ponder, tap that like icon. It really does assist the channel. And if you want more material like this about the psychology of wealth, about building real financial safety instead of just seeking salary, subscribe and enable alerts so you do not miss the following one. Your 40s are not the conclusion of your financial tale. They are the chapter where you resolve how the story concludes. Make it a high-quality one.